The year is 2025 and the global economic landscape is a battleground. In one corner stands the United States, a heavyweight contender with a history of wielding tariffs like a blunt instrument. In the other corner we have China, an economic powerhouse in its own right ready to trade blows. The latest round of this economic brawl, tariffs and lots of them. The US has slapped tariffs on a vast array of Chinese goods, some as high as a jaw-dropping 104%. That's right folks, over double the original price. The impact was immediate and far-reaching. Chinese goods, once a ubiquitous presence on American shelves, suddenly became more expensive. Businesses, caught off guard by the sudden shift, scrambled to adjust. Consumers felt the pinch in their wallets as prices for everyday items crept steadily upward. The trade war, once a distant rumble on the horizon, had arrived on America's doorstep. But this was not a one-sided affair. China, never one to back down from a challenge, retaliated with tariffs of its own. The Middle Kingdom targeted American goods with equal ferocity, slapping tariffs as high as 125% on key exports. From soybeans to smartphones, the trade war was beginning to resemble a game of economic chicken, with both sides seemingly determined to stand their ground, no matter the cost. The trade war, like a rogue wave, crashed into the intricate network of global supply chains, leaving chaos in its wake. Remember those tariffs we talked about? They weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet, they had real-world consequences, and nowhere were these consequences felt more acutely than in the world of shipping and logistics. Imagine, if you will, over 25,000 shipping containers, each one packed to the brim with billions of dollars worth of goods, stranded at Chinese ports. These containers, caught in the crossfire of the trade war, became potent symbols of the disruption that rippled through the global economy. Businesses, accustomed to the smooth flow of goods across borders, found themselves navigating a logistical nightmare. Factories reliant on just-in-time inventory systems ground to a halt, their production lines silenced by the lack of essential components. The ripple effects were felt far and wide. In the United States, businesses large and small grappled with delays, shortages, and rising costs. The carefully calibrated machinery of global trade, once humming along with predictable efficiency, had been thrown out of whack. The search for alternative manufacturing hubs began in earnest, with Southeast Asia emerging as a potential contender. As the trade war raged on, American consumers found themselves caught in the crossfire, their wallets feeling the heat. Remember those tariffs? The ones designed to protect American industries and bring jobs back home? Well, they had an unintended consequence: higher prices for everyday goods. Chinese manufacturers, facing shrinking profit margins due to the tariffs, refused to shoulder the burden alone. Instead, they passed on the increased costs to American importers, who, in turn, had little choice but to raise prices for consumers. From clothing and electronics to toys and furniture, the price of imported goods crept steadily upward. American shoppers, accustomed to a steady diet of cheap Chinese imports, were forced to confront a new reality. The era of bargain basement prices was over. The trade war had exposed a fundamental vulnerability in the globalized economy: its reliance on complex, interconnected supply chains that spanned continents. When one link in this chain was disrupted, the entire system felt the strain, and in this case it was American consumers who were left holding the bag, literally. While the trade war raged on, China was busy developing a financial weapon of a different sort: the digital yuan, also known as the ECNY. This wasn't your average digital currency, mind you. This was a central bank digital currency, backed by the full faith and credit of the Chinese government, and it had the potential to shake up the global financial system as we knew it. Imagine a world where international transactions could be conducted instantly, securely, and without the need for intermediaries like SWIFT, the global financial messaging system that had long been dominated by the United States. That was the promise of the ECNY. China, with its vast economic might and its ambitions to challenge the US dollar's global dominance, saw the ECNY as a way to re-engineer global finance in its favor. The ECNY wasn't just some pie-in-the-sky idea either. China had been diligently laying the groundwork for its digital currency for years, conducting extensive pilot programs and fine-tuning its technology, and the world was taking notice. Section 5, CIPs, Rewriting the Rules of Global Finance. The ECNY was only one part of China's grand plan to reshape the global financial landscape. The other part was CIPS, the Cross-Border Interbank Payment System. This homegrown alternative to SWIFT provided a platform for processing cross-border transactions in yuan, bypassing the need for US dollar clearing. Think of it as China's answer to the SWIFT system, a way to conduct international trade and finance without relying on the US dollar as the intermediary currency, and it was gaining traction. Over 1,400 financial institutions in over 110 countries had signed up for CIPS, handling billions of dollars in transactions daily. The implications were significant. By creating an alternative financial system that operated independently of the US dollar, China was chipping away at the dollar's dominance and establishing the yuan as a viable alternative for international trade and investment. The trade war, it seemed, had only accelerated China's push to create a more multipolar financial world, one where the yuan played an increasingly prominent role. The digital yuan and CIPS weren't just abstract concepts, they were having a real impact on the global financial system. The yuan's share of global transactions had tripled in just 2 years, a testament to China's growing economic clout and its determination to internationalize its currency. And it wasn't just talk. Countries were putting their money where their mouth was. Kenya, for example, had made headlines by purchasing oil from Saudi Arabia using the yuan, a move that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. Argentina, grappling with an economic crisis, had even used the yuan to repay a portion of its IMF loan. The yuan was no longer just a regional currency, it was emerging as a viable alternative to the US dollar on the world stage. The implications were far-reaching. A multipolar financial system, one where the yuan played a more prominent role, would have profound implications for global trade, investment, and geopolitics. The era of the US dollar's unchallenged dominance was drawing to a close, and a new era, one characterized by greater competition and diversification, was dawning. The trade war, while disruptive in the short term, had inadvertently played into China's long-term strategic goals. It had forced China to become more self-reliant, to diversify its trading partners, and to accelerate the development of its own financial systems. And it had exposed the vulnerabilities of a global economy overly reliant on the United States. China, with its vast manufacturing capacity, its growing technological prowess, and its expanding network of trade and investment partners, was well positioned to capitalize on this shifting landscape. The Belt and Road Initiative, China's ambitious infrastructure development program, was already connecting Asia, Africa, and Europe, creating new markets for Chinese goods and services. The trade war had only strengthened China's resolve to become a global leader in its own right, one that could chart its own course and shape the rules of the global economy. As the trade war raged on, a new dynamic emerged in the global manufacturing landscape, the rise of Southeast Asia as a potential alternative to China. American businesses, facing rising costs and supply chain disruptions due to the tariffs, began to explore relocating their manufacturing operations to countries like Vietnam, Thailand, and Malaysia. These Southeast Asian nations, eager to attract foreign investment and boost their own economies, rolled out the red carpet for American businesses, offering tax breaks, streamlined regulations, and access to a young and growing workforce. Factories sprouted up, ports bustled with activity, and a new manufacturing hub began to take shape. But this shift wasn't without its challenges. Southeast Asian nations, while eager to capitalize on the trade war, faced their own set of constraints, including limited infrastructure, bureaucratic hurdles, and concerns about labor conditions. The US-China trade war, once a distant rumble on the horizon, had become a defining feature of the global economic landscape. It had exposed the fragility of global supply chains, fueled inflationary pressures, and accelerated the fragmentation of the global economy into competing blocs. The world, it seemed, was dividing into two camps, those aligned with the United States and those aligned with China. The long-term implications of this divide were still unfolding, but one thing was clear. The era of globalization, characterized by free trade, open markets, and the free flow of capital, was giving way to a new era, one defined by strategic competition, economic nationalism, and the weaponization of trade and technology. The future of the global economy remained uncertain, but one thing was for sure: the trade war had irrevocably altered the landscape, setting in motion forces that would continue to shape the world for years to come.
Rare earth elements. They may sound like something out of a science fiction novel, but these materials are very real and very important. They are essential components of many of the technologies driving the 21st century, from smartphones and electric vehicles to advanced military hardware. The world's dependence on these elements is undeniable, and control over their supply has become a key point of geopolitical leverage. Recently, the United States government announced a new licensing requirement for companies seeking to export certain rare earth elements from the US to countries like China. This move, widely seen as a de facto export ban, has sent shockwaves through the global economy and ignited a fierce debate about the future of international trade. The US government argues that these restrictions are necessary to protect national security and reduce reliance on foreign suppliers, particularly China, which currently dominates the rare earth element market. However, critics argue that this policy is a dangerous escalation of trade tensions and could have unintended consequences for American businesses and consumers. The immediate impact of the US licensing requirement was felt most acutely in Asian markets, where investors reacted with a mixture of panic and uncertainty. The Hang Seng Index, a key barometer of the Hong Kong stock market, plummeted by 13%, its sharpest decline in over 3 decades. The Shanghai Composite Index, tracking China's largest companies, also tumbled, shedding 7% of its value and wiping out over $500 billion in market capitalization. This dramatic sell-off reflected the deep integration of Asian economies into global supply chains, particularly in sectors heavily reliant on rare earth elements. China, as the world's leading producer of these materials, holds significant sway over their availability and price. The US restrictions have raised fears of supply disruptions and price spikes, threatening the profitability and competitiveness of companies across Asia. The market turmoil in Asia serves as a stark reminder of the interconnected nature of the global economy. Actions taken by one nation, even with the intention of protecting its own interests, can have far-reaching and often unpredictable consequences for others. The shockwaves from the US licensing requirement were not confined to Asian markets. Wall Street also experienced a wave of selling, with major US stock indices tumbling as investors grappled with the growing uncertainty surrounding the trade war with China. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, a closely watched benchmark of American blue-chip companies, plunged by 1,500 points over the past month, while the S&P 500, a broader measure of the US stock market, shed 3.5% in the last week alone, its biggest decline so far this year. The flight to safety was evident in the performance of other asset classes. Gold, traditionally seen as a safe haven during times of economic and geopolitical turmoil, surged to multi-year highs as investors sought refuge from the volatility in the stock market. US Treasury bonds, another traditional safe haven, also rallied, with yields falling as investors piled into these low-risk assets. The market reaction in the US underscores the growing anxiety among investors about the potential for a full-blown trade war between the world's 2 largest economies. Such a conflict, many fear, would have devastating consequences for global growth and could push the world into a recession. The economic landscape under Trump's administration has been, well, a topic of heated debate. On one hand, his rhetoric has often painted a picture of unprecedented economic success. On the other hand, key economic indicators tell a more nuanced story. Employment rates, stock market performance, and GDP growth have all shown mixed signals. It's a complex scenario where perception and reality sometimes seem at odds. As we delve deeper, we'll explore how these contrasting narratives have shaped public opinion and policy decisions. Tariff turmoil, it's not just a headline, it's something that trickles down to affect all of us. You might notice it at the grocery store, where prices for certain items have started to climb. Or maybe you've seen it in the cost of electronics, clothing, and even cars. The everyday consumer feels the pinch as businesses pass on the increased costs resulting from tariffs. It's a ripple effect that can strain household budgets and shift spending habits. Around the world, international voices are raising alarms about the broader economic fallout. Leaders and economists from various countries are warning that the ripple effects of tariff conflicts could lead to slower global growth. They caution that prolonged trade disputes might disrupt supply chains, increase production costs, and ultimately lead to job losses. The interconnected nature of today's global economy means that what happens in one region can have significant repercussions elsewhere. Experts are delving into the data and pointing to some concerning long-term consequences. They suggest that sustained trade tensions could deter investment, hinder innovation, and lead to a prolonged period of economic uncertainty. Analysts argue that the instability might make it harder for businesses to plan for the future, potentially stifling economic progress. In the long run, this could mean a less dynamic and more fragile global economy. Navigating the path to economic stability and global cooperation is no small feat. It requires dialogue, compromise, and a willingness to find common ground. Policymakers are urged to work together to create fair and sustainable trade practices. The goal is to foster an environment where economies can thrive collectively rather than at the expense of one another. It's about building a resilient global economy that benefits everyone, ensuring prosperity and stability for future generations.
Donald Trump's presidency was defined by its unpredictability. Few areas embodied this more than his approach to trade. Trump believed in a policy of America first. He argued that other countries were taking advantage of the U.S. in trade deals. His solution? Tariffs, lots of them. Trump slapped tariffs on goods from China, Mexico, the European Union, and Canada. These tariffs were taxes on imported goods. The idea was to make foreign goods more expensive. This, in theory, would encourage Americans to buy American-made products. Trump's tariffs targeted a wide range of goods. Steel, aluminum, solar panels, washing machines, you name it, he probably put a tariff on it. The tariffs were met with immediate condemnation from economists and businesses alike. They warned of higher prices for consumers and retaliation from trading partners. Trump, however, remained undeterred. He saw tariffs as a way to bring back manufacturing jobs to the U.S. and reduce the trade deficit. He believed that other countries would back down in the face of American pressure. He was wrong. The economic impact of Trump's tariffs was swift and significant. Prices for consumers rose on everything from cars to washing machines. Businesses, particularly in manufacturing and agriculture, faced higher costs and lost markets. The stock market, a barometer of investor confidence, experienced significant volatility. Trump had promised that the tariffs would revive American manufacturing. However, the reality was far more complex. While some companies did benefit from the tariffs, many others struggled. The tariffs disrupted supply chains, increased uncertainty, and led to job losses in some sectors. The agricultural industry was hit particularly hard. China, a major importer of American soybeans, retaliated with tariffs of its own. American farmers found themselves with surplus crops and nowhere to sell them. The Trump administration was forced to provide billions of dollars in aid to farmers to offset their losses. Despite the mounting evidence to the contrary, Trump continued to claim that the tariffs were a success. He pointed to the strong economy as proof that his policies were working. However, many economists argued that the economic growth was due to other factors such as tax cuts, and that the tariffs were actually slowing down the economy. The European Union, a long-standing ally of the United States, was caught off guard by Trump's tariffs. The EU viewed the tariffs as unjustified and harmful to the global trading system. They were particularly angered by Trump's decision to impose tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from the EU on the grounds of national security. The EU responded with retaliatory tariffs of its own. They targeted a range of American products, including agricultural goods, motorcycles, and bourbon. The EU's tariffs were carefully chosen to inflict maximum political pain on the Trump administration. They targeted products that were produced in states that were key to Trump's electoral base. The EU's message was clear. They would not be bullied by the United States. They were prepared to engage in a trade war, even if it meant economic pain for both sides. The EU's response was coordinated with other countries, such as Canada and Mexico, that were also targeted by Trump's tariffs. Canada, America's northern neighbor and largest trading partner, also felt the sting of Trump's tariffs. Like the EU, Canada considered the tariffs to be unjustified and a threat to the rules-based trading system. Trump's tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum were particularly contentious, given the integrated nature of the North American auto industry. Canada's response was swift and strategic. They imposed retaliatory tariffs on a range of American products, including steel, aluminum, maple syrup, and ketchup. Like the EU, Canada targeted products that were produced in states that were important to Trump's political base. Canada also took steps to strengthen its trade ties with other countries. They signed a free trade agreement with the European Union and joined the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a trade agreement among 11 Pacific Rim countries. These agreements were seen as a way for Canada to diversify its trading partners and reduce its reliance on the United States. Section 5. A transatlantic alliance. The EU and Canada strengthen their bond. In the face of Trump's protectionist policies, the European Union and Canada found common ground. They shared a commitment to free trade and the rules-based international order. They also recognized the need to present a united front against Trump's unpredictable and often aggressive approach to trade. The EU and Canada deepened their existing trade and investment relationship. They also increased cooperation in areas such as energy, security, and climate change. The EU saw Canada as a reliable supplier of energy, particularly as it sought to reduce its dependence on Russian gas. Section 6. Global trade in the crosshairs, the ripple effects of Trump's tariffs. The trade war initiated by Trump's tariffs had far-reaching consequences for the global economy. The tariffs disrupted global supply chains, increased uncertainty, and dampened economic growth. The International Monetary Fund, or IMF, warned that the tariffs could lead to a global recession. The tariffs also contributed to a rise in protectionism around the world. Other countries, emboldened by Trump's actions, imposed their own tariffs. This tit-for-tat escalation of tariffs threatened to unravel the global trading system that had been built up over decades. The World Trade Organization, the international body responsible for regulating trade, was caught in the crossfire. The Trump administration criticized the WTO as being ineffective and biased against the United States. They blocked the appointment of judges to the WTO's appellate body, effectively paralyzing its dispute settlement mechanism. Section 7. Winners and losers. The uneven impact of the trade war. The trade war had an uneven impact on different sectors and countries. Some companies and industries benefited from the tariffs, while others suffered significant losses. The tariffs also had a disproportionate impact on developing countries, which were more reliant on trade for their economic growth. In the United States, the tariffs led to higher prices for consumers and businesses. They also caused job losses in some sectors, particularly in manufacturing and agriculture. However, some companies benefited from the tariffs, as they faced less competition from foreign imports. China, the primary target of Trump's tariffs, experienced a slowdown in economic growth. The tariffs also contributed to tensions between the United States and China, which spilled over into other areas such as technology and security. Section 8. The future of global trade. A world reordered? Trump's trade policies left an indelible mark on the global trading system. The tariffs he imposed and the retaliatory measures they provoked disrupted global supply chains, increased uncertainty, and contributed to a rise in protectionism around the world. The future of global trade remained uncertain. The Biden administration, which took office in 2021, promised to take a more multilateral approach to trade. However, they were slow to remove the tariffs imposed by Trump. The Biden administration argued that the tariffs gave them leverage in negotiations with China and other countries. The COVID-19 pandemic, which began in late 2019, further disrupted global trade. The pandemic highlighted the interconnectedness of the global economy and the importance of stable supply chains. It also led to calls for greater resilience and diversification in supply chains. Section 9. A legacy of disruption. Trump's enduring mark on global trade. Trump's trade policies were among the most consequential of his presidency. They represented a sharp break from decades of American support for free trade and the rules-based international order. The tariffs he imposed and the retaliatory measures they provoked disrupted global supply chains, increased uncertainty, and contributed to a rise in protectionism around the world. The full impact of Trump's trade policies will continue to be debated for years to come. However, there is no doubt that they left an enduring mark on the global trading system. The future of global trade will depend on the choices made by the United States and other major economies. Will they choose cooperation and multilateralism, or will they continue down the path of protectionism and conflict? The answer to this question will have profound implications for the global economy and for international relations in the 21st century. The Oval Office, once a symbol of American strength, now a crucible of chaos. President Trump, embattled and increasingly isolated, faces a crisis of his own making. The American economy teeters on the precipice. Global markets shudder. Yet, the president remains seemingly oblivious, lost in a digital world of his own creation. The numbers tell a grim tale. The economy, once a source of Trumpian boasts, contracts at an alarming rate. GDP projections paint a picture of impending recession. CEO confidence, a key indicator of future economic health, sits at a level not seen since the dark days of 2012. America, it seems, is staring into an abyss. Amidst this maelstrom, a question emerges. Can America weather this perfect storm? Can the nation endure the consequences of its leaders' actions? The answers, as uncertain as they are consequential, lie in the heart of this unfolding drama. The warning signs have long flickered, whispers of economic turmoil growing louder with each passing day. Now, they roar. The Federal Reserve, that bastion of economic stability, confirms the worst. GDP, the lifeblood of the nation's economic health, has plummeted by a staggering 3%. The stock market, once a symbol of American prosperity, spirals downward. Business leaders, once hesitant to criticize the president, now sound the alarm with increasing urgency. Phone calls flood the White House, pleas for action met with silence or worse, indifference. A bellwether of corporate sentiment publishes a survey of 220 top executives. The results are stark. Trump's policies, particularly his trade war, are viewed as disastrous. The numbers are stark, undeniable. Yet within the walls of the White House, a different reality takes hold. A reality detached from the anxieties of the nation, fueled by a president seemingly more concerned with his digital echo chamber than the economic plight of the nation. While the economy teeters and anxieties mount, the president retreats into the digital realm. His weapon of choice? Truth Social, the social media platform he helped create. Here, amidst a cacophony of misinformation and adulation, he finds solace. Hours are spent not in strategy sessions with economic advisors but in online skirmishes with perceived enemies. Elon Musk, the enigmatic tech mogul, becomes a frequent target of his digital ire. Every slight, real or imagined, is met with a barrage of angry tweets. The disconnect is jarring. A nation's economic well-being held hostage to the whims of a president seemingly more concerned with settling scores and stoking his ego than addressing the very real problems facing millions of Americans. Even the president's most ardent supporters can no longer ignore the writing on the wall. The economic turmoil, once dismissed as fake news or a temporary blip, has become impossible to deny. Conservative media outlets, once reliable cheerleaders for the Trump administration, begin to break ranks. Long a bastion of conservative economic thought, publishes scathing editorials denouncing the president's trade war as reckless and economically devastating. Fox News, while still largely supportive, allows a growing chorus of dissenting voices to question the president's economic stewardship. The cracks in the facade of unwavering support are impossible to miss. A growing realization emerges: the president's economic policies are failing, and even his most loyal allies can no longer ignore the consequences. Section 5. Misplaced priorities, straws over substance, security cuts loom. As the economy spirals downward, the president's priorities appear increasingly detached from the realities facing the nation. A crusade against paper straws consumes his attention, his administration devoting valuable time and resources to promoting the use of plastic alternatives. The Justice Department, instead of focusing on pressing legal matters, finds itself tasked with defending this baffling initiative. Meanwhile, whispers of potential cuts to Social Security, a lifeline for millions of elderly Americans, begin to circulate. The Social Security Administration itself issues a stark warning: privatization, a long-held goal of conservative lawmakers, could have disastrous consequences, leading to increased healthcare costs and reduced program effectiveness. The disconnect is staggering. While Americans struggle with economic uncertainty, their president concerns himself with straws and contemplates cuts to a program designed to protect the most vulnerable. Section 6. Guantanamo Bay, a stain on American values. In a move that sends shockwaves through the nation and beyond, the president orders the transfer of undocumented immigrants to Guantanamo Bay. The justification? National security. The reality? A blatant attempt to demonize and punish vulnerable individuals fleeing desperate circumstances. Fox News, even in its diminished watchdog role, unearths a disturbing truth. None of the 290 detainees have criminal records. The revelation sparks outrage, forcing the administration to quietly release those held at the infamous detention camp. The incident serves as a chilling reminder of the administration's willingness to exploit fear and prejudice for political gain. It is a stain on the soul of America, a betrayal of the values upon which the nation was founded. Section 7. Public disapproval. The tide turns against Trump. The American people are not fooled. They see the economic turmoil, the misplaced priorities, the erosion of American values, and they disapprove. A poll from Michigan, a state once considered safely in the president's column, reveals the depth of the discontent. 70% of voters disapprove of his job performance. Even former allies speak out. A former White House advisor, granted anonymity to speak freely, confirms what many have long suspected. The president is more concerned with his image on social media than with addressing the real issues facing the nation. The tide is turning. The chorus of disapproval grows louder. The president, once seemingly Teflon-coated, now finds himself facing a reckoning. Section 8. The Gathering Storm, a Legacy of Chaos. As the president's term enters its twilight, a sense of foreboding hangs heavy in the air. The economy teeters on the brink, a testament to failed policies and misplaced priorities. Social divisions, exacerbated by the president's rhetoric and actions, run deeper than ever. America, once a beacon of hope and stability, finds itself adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The world watches, a mixture of pity and disbelief, as the once mighty nation grapples with the consequences of its choices. The president's legacy, once a subject of fierce debate, now seems tragically clear, a legacy of chaos, division, and decline. Section 9. A Crossroads for America, Hope Amidst the Ruins. Yet even amidst the ruins, a flicker of hope persists. The American spirit, that indomitable force that has seen the nation through countless trials and tribulations, endures. The very values under assault, democracy, justice, equality, remain potent forces for change. The road ahead will be long and arduous. The damage inflicted will take time to repair. But America has faced dark times before, and emerged stronger. The task now falls to the American people to chart a new course, to rebuild their nation on a foundation of unity, compassion, and a shared commitment to a brighter future. The time for division is over. The time for healing and renewal is at hand. America, at this crossroads in its history, must choose wisely. The fate of the nation and indeed the world hangs in the balance.